Under the Insert, Episode 1, The Women of Through the Ages. I recently had a Reddit argument with some doofuses on the LEGO subreddit about a proposed LEGO build called Human Evolution that the designer had included exactly 0 female minifigures in. I pointed it out and was lambasted with statements like, historically men had a more relevant role, to justify it, without questioning who tells the story or what story they are telling. Of course, the response, that's how it's always been done, the end, would seem like a justified answer. And it is one that's hard to argue against without some pushback, eliciting responses like, oh, why does it matter? Don't you have better things to worry about? Etc. Well, I have lots of room for worrying about lots of things, and one of the things I spend a lot of time thinking about is representation in media, including games. I play a lot of board games. One of my favorite tabletop games, as well as digital implementations of a board game, is Through the Ages. The original iteration definitely had a representation issue, not just on a gendered level. I'm not even going to talk about non-Europeans being included, or rather excluded. There was one woman included, and woman is a stretch to describe the teenaged Joan of Arc. Already a problematic choice for a hero. Oh, look, it's fine. She can be a hero. She's not only a military figure, but also a religious figure and a monarchist. Ooh, she's a very acceptable and also magic. She's frequently one of only a handful of women considered significant enough to feature in historically themed gaming. In Through the Ages, and she makes sense though, one of the urban building types you can build is a temple. Jeanne d'Arc adds your civilization's religious and monarchistic fervor to your military value, thematically on point. Plus, she lets you see what the next event is, as though she really were magic. Through the Ages is very, very good at folding the leaders into the game in a thematically cohesive way, like delicious butter into a puff pastry dough. So when the new Leaders and Wonders expansion launched on the app a couple of weeks ago, I was beyond excited. I didn't actively think about what kind of representation I would want to see in the leaders or how they would integrate. I was just pumped to get more content for one of my favorite games. And then, right there in the updated icon for the game, there she was, that bastion of antiquity-era leadership, femininity, and power, Cleopatra. Okay, of course, I thought. There always needs to be Cleopatra. Given her prowess in board games, I'm surprised she wasn't in the original. But does it have to be Elizabeth Taylor's Cleopatra? One of the most striking things about Cleopatra contemporary representations of Cleopatra is how they are not what we would deem as particularly strikingly attractive. She was not contemporarily famous for being a seductress. She was a monarch who focused on alliance building. Through the Ages is tying her to wonder building because the pyramids are Egyptian, even though they were built 2.5 millennia before her rule. I know that there are no pacts early in the game, but having Cleopatra exist as an early way for players' civilizations to interact and attempt to benefit from each other could have been interesting. Instead, she's Egyptian without being Egyptian. I hate to say that choosing Cleopatra is a lazy choice for including a woman in the game, but it definitely comes across that way sometimes, especially if her presence isn't adding anything new to the conversation. Why not have Hypatia, who would have made a good companion to Aristotle from the base game? Most of the leaders, though, are interesting and disrupt the balance of the game in exciting new ways, and they occasionally seem thoughtful and careful. I do not believe that the designer's intent at any point was to willfully disregard women's role in history. Boudica's ability is flexible, an early example of in-game conditional benefits. If she is the leader of the weakest civilization, she has extra resources for raising an army. If she is strong and not needing to revolt against an imperialistic foe, her civilization produces resources or food or innovation. She feels like a well-rounded leader. Plus, historically, she is one of my favorite figures, not just for her warrior queen persona, but also for the mythologizing Victorians ironically inflicted on her, a vast imperialist nation co-opting the story of a rebellious underdog to tie to their own queen is yum delicious historical ridiculousness. As the game progresses, more women are introduced, including women who are not traditionally included in gaming, as they don't have very much military history weight. On a mechanics level, I understand why so many games feature some form of combat. Historically, humans are terrible to each other. In a ludological sense, combat is easy to resolve. You can calculate an army's strength and make an emotionless comparison to figure out who the winner is. For me, it can get tedious or boring. My instinct is not to build a military and attack other players. I want to build a civ that flourishes with culture and advancements. Is it naive of me to try to accomplish that without imperialism and conquest? Actually, probably, yeah. But games are designed to be fun and imaginative. I don't play through the ages for historically accurate recreation of history, which is why I think it's so delightful to have Shakespeare lording over the Great Wall, or Boudica building the Acropolis, or Darwin constructing the Manhattan Project. While Boudica directly impacted military strength, Age 1 brings more subtle methods of affecting military prowess. Take Eleanor of Aquitaine, queen of both France and England, albeit at different times, immeasurably woven in the history of the Crusades. She is perhaps erroneously considered a leader of the second, and the third was led by one of her sons, Richard the Lionhearted, frequently incarcerated and forcibly removed from various locations. Her power is tied to military cards, being able to draw them both before and after her turn, as well as getting points for discarded extra cards, enabling her to efficiently cycle through more options and be more militarily nimble. Military isn't just used for strength comparisons or military cards. It can also be used to colonize. Isabella of Castile can exchange resources for colonization value in the game, echoing her much-lauded role as a patron of Christopher Columbus, a leader from the base game. But her role does not seem to echo the destructive legacy of this action, or of her and Ferdinand starting the Inquisition or being involved with the Reconquista. When I saw her in the expansion, my immediate excited thought was that maybe something new had come up in later ages, some kind of consequence to colonization early in the game. But, spoiler alert, there's none of that. There's just sanctioned colonization with no consequences. Maybe in the end of the age cleanup, every civilization should have to either recommit military to one of their colonies or lose them to independence, along with any benefit afforded them. There is a distinct history has ended and the current results are as good as we're going to get feel to some civ games that is frustrating to work through. Can we, in the 21st century, be okay with a game that encourages colonization but does not address how terrible it could be? Age 2 gives us Maria Theresa and Catherine the Great, two women who ruled vast empires by themselves. But this just leads to further concern for what kind of people are chosen as leaders. Yeah, Maria Theresa was an empress who reinvigorated Austria, but she was also such a religious bigot that she was viewed as intolerant by some of the people alive at the same time as she was. And that's not just me looking down on the past of the 21st century, saying anti-Semitism is wrong. Some of her contemporaries thought so too. And Catherine the Great is an understandable choice. We've seen her sexualized and mocked for centuries. Her power in this game is, once per game, if you are stronger than another player, you can just take one of their population. I'm not 100% sure what this symbolizes, but I imagine, and admittedly could be very wrong about this, that it stems from her literally giving serfs to her lovers. For example, Pyotr Zavadovsky, whom she gave 50,000 rubles, a pension of 5,000 rubles, and 4,000 peasants in Ukraine, which sounds like a messed up missing verse from the 12 Days of Christmas. But both of these women were still aristocrats, set aside from the burgeoning working and middle classes. Why not include an abolitionist or a suffragette? Why focus on the powerful? This expansion plays with the interactions between mechanics so deftly. Why keep the monarchy intact? Age 3 will see Marie Skłodowska-Curie and Marlene Dietrich as the female options for leaders. Marie Skłodowska-Curie is cliché at this point, but Dietrich is a fascinating and delightful choice. Marie Skłodowska-Curie, she went by both surnames simultaneously, is a very complex leader. The civilization's best mind produces science, but also the best lab provides military strength. Prior to playing this game, I'd only been aware of Skłodowska-Curie's work with radioactive material, but thinking about it now, I did not know of any practical applications she fostered. It all seemed experimental and laboratory-based. During World War I, she developed mobile radiology units to help diagnose and treat combat injuries as quickly as possible. This use of Skłodowska-Curie shows how the leaders can really be used to full advantage in a game like Through the Ages. She is specific to this time and to the abilities of her card. Now, as previously mentioned, Marlene Dietrich caught me off guard. I had previously been unaware of her role helping to raise the morale of Allied soldiers during World War II, and having her ability linked not only to theaters, but also to assisting tactics cards, a clever way of showing increased morale, is clever and elegant. She was powerful and influential in a way not mandated by birth. She was a bisexual German who immigrated to the United States. Her position did lend her some privilege during the war when other German immigrants were interned and or discriminated against in the United States. But since none of the other leaders in the game ever faced consequences for their actions or for things outside of their control, I'm not going to begrudge the game designers a lack of a nuanced representation for Dietrich. Through the Ages is published by Czech Games Edition. It's designed by a prominent Czech board game designer, Vlad Chvátil. This should be a huge advantage for the game. And it's interesting that there is only one hometown hero represented in the game, Jan Žižka. I love Jan Žižka in this game for several reasons. One, I've never seen him in a board game. While my loose dalliances in what could be considered wargaming have been far from extensive, I've never even seen his name on anything in gaming, yet Wikipedia describes him as one of the most renowned military leaders by historians. 2, he's a local hero for the designer. Give me new heroes, new personas, new fables and stories. There are certain heroes I associate with where I was at different times, heroes who I like for their stories and can be impressed by because they're packaged to be impressive. Zhukov, Susanin, Nelson, Bowie, et al. On the note of Bowie and Texas history in general, I highly recommend October's issue of Texas Monthly, not just because of its fantastically evocative cover, but also for the thoughtful content. 3, his ability, like Boudica's and Jean's before them, ties his military might and ability to the civil side of his civilization. His tactics are boosted by his farmers, telling his story through the game. He was remarkably skilled at training peasants quickly and effectively to fight against bigger armies. So, why in a video focusing on the women of Through the Ages do I mention Žižka? It's the care, the local knowledge, the gentle reverence given to him, even if he isn't universally known. That doofus from the Lego subreddit example earlier might not have thought to include Žižka in a diorama of men's successes, but he fits, he works, and he's interesting. Given more representation and more stories from more sources, the same could be done for female leaders. In this expansion, I think the ratio leans more heavily towards successful implementations of female leaders, but there is still room for improvement. We get it. Everybody loves Cleopatra. It's reached trope-like levels. As a rule, if someone is viewed as one of the most desirable and sexualized queens from history, even in 19th century opera, maybe it's time to find new representations of women. The Dinner Party is a seminal feminist art installation by Judy Chicago. It appeals to me on multiple levels. It is massive and sprawling and chaotic, but ordered. Its media are traditional feminine expressions of creativity and crafting, ceramics, embroidery, weaving. Its guests span prehistory to history, mythological to corporeal. Are there criticisms of the work? Yeah, of course. Judy Chicago did not compensate the workshop that she created to build the piece, undervaluing already traditionally undervalued craft work. Also, as is typical of European and white feminists even to this day, Judy Chicago's focus of feminine history focuses on European and white women. So why do I mention this piece? There are literally hundreds of names of women featured in this piece. There are the 39 place settings, and associated with the place settings are 998 names written on tiles under the settings. Now, one of those names is of a man mistakenly assumed to have been a historical Greek woman. So there's 997 additional women. So 1,036 names to pull from when creating games and leaders. 1,036 names to research and learn about. And 1,036 narratives to adapt and stories to create. While some of the names are already included in games, including this one, like Boudica and Eleanor of Aquitaine, there's a wealth of inspiration for others, like Margaret Sanger. I will be the first to admit that Margaret Sanger has her own problems. Having been accused of being racist and a eugenicist, she is not a perfect candidate. But no one is. For us to not branch out or accept new, fresh blood into our canon of historical figures deemed worthy of inclusion and veneration because they were not perfect does us no justice. As mentioned previously, every single leader has something problematic about them. Keeping the status quo is a way to never criticize our heroes as lazy and unfair to us, our future, and our past. Distilling the human side of a civilization down to one leader is a hell of a task, especially when those leaders are real, actual people from history. Looking at who has written that history, what has come down to us, how we can parse what has come down and tell new stories and incorporate the old, is a time-honored tradition. A board game doesn't need to be Arabian Nights or Above and Below to have a strong narrative element. The subtitle for Through the Ages is A New Story of Civilization. We should use these opportunities to redefine who we are, who we come from, and who we can strive to be. Through the Ages, Leaders and Wonders makes concerted steps in the right direction. Hopefully we'll see more thoughtful representation of people of all backgrounds and genders in civilization games in the future, if we even need leaders at all. But that's a topic for another essay.